Welcome to the Creative Industry Insight podcast, a podcast that looks at various roles in the creative world. I'm your host, Bobby. Today's guest, cinematographer David Raedeke, joins us to talk about their work on the Black Mirror episode Loch Henry. Please be warned, there are heavy spoilers in this episode, so sit back and relax as we jump into the conversation with David. Hi, David. Thank you for joining me today.
Hello. Nice. Looking forward to it, to chat to you.
Yeah, I'm excited to sit down to talk about Black Mirror episode Loch Henry, which, it's it has been an episode that has left me on the edge of my seat. It is one of those very sort of more smaller of the Netflix Black Mirror episodes, but it is so effective, and I'm just really really excited to have you on to talk about it today.
Thank you.
I guess the best place to start would be the beginning. How did the project come about for you, and what is it that made you want to take it on?
Do you know, it was kind of weird. I just finished a project. It was a four-parter TV drama for BBC, and I thought I need a break, so I went down to Scotland, to the Highlands. And as soon as I was back from Scotland, I got a call. Could you come up back to Scotland? Would you be interested in taking this project on, basically? And then obviously there was an interview process and so on. I had to read the script, but just the end of the story is I was back in Scotland very soon. And it came about, obviously, as it does, through my agent. I read the script. I liked it. I very much like Sam Miller and his work. Beforehand, I knew it. And so for me, obviously, Black Mirror as well. I'm a big fan. So that was a no-brainer.
Yeah, I guess when you have those sort of projects where you have certain things align, I think sometimes you can't say no. And if there's people that you're going to work with, then it's just like, wow, okay. But it's also, to me, it makes me chuckle a little bit that it's like you literally probably the first thing you do, put your bags down, check your emails. It's like, oh, by the way, can you come back to where you've just been? And it's like, oh, okay, I'll be there. First flight, book me there and I'll be there. The episode as well, it's a very much like show rather than tell. And, we do get little clues sprinkled in about, as audience members, of like a hint of what's going on in the show. And I'm sure as like a DP, like when you're in the script, it's written out that there's certain cues. So I think like the mask on the wall, and then also the videotapes, and also the little flippant comments like, oh, your father didn't have a setup like this. And it's like, oh, imagine if he did for broadcasting. But as a DP, with all of these ideas written down on paper, how do you go about capturing those images and sort of making sure that those things they're sprinkled into the frame?
So I think it's, you provide a certain arsenal of cues, and then in the edit, the kind of tone is going to be fine-tuned, how much to give away of the story. Here was very much a case of staying in the perspective of our two main characters, not to give the story away, to keep the tension alive, and also for the audience kind of to go on this journey with these two characters. Yeah, so we had a kind of couple of key points where we knew this would be hints. How strongly there should be pointed at this, that was kind of the question. And that's what we had also, we sometimes did a couple of shots of something just to kind of have an option later on.
Yeah, because I can imagine, like, as you mentioned as well, like that you're laying the foundations for the edit, that's where they will set the tone. But I guess if you're laying those quite important foundations, I can imagine that there's always sort of, as you said, that hitting the right tone, then also getting the right image to accompany what you're doing, but not just deter away from the main characters. Because as an audience member watching it, I guess in my experience, I knew that there was something up when there was like the videotapes, but you didn't really necessarily know what was up. But then also, it made me think about one of my friends who had loads of videotapes as well, and the whole idea of those VHS tapes and how at that time you used to record everything off the TV. Like I remember recording Wallace and Gromit, the TV series, and having that all on one VHS tape. And back to my friend, he had like his sister's first Holy Communion recorded on tape and recorded over it with neighbors. So I
Oh,
know. So yeah, having those little hints and ideas does really create the tension, and then knowing that there probably might have been other hints that you might have captured that you didn't put in just because it might not be in right later on. But then also the fact that the hints is not there for the audience because your main concern was always the characters and having them push the narrative along rather than the audience doing it as like a solve along playing Cluedo or something like that.
yes, absolutely. I mean, this also tonally was important because first we thought like, there's this beautiful landscape. How stylized should we be? And actually, we wanted not to give. We felt if we would be too stylized, we would give it away too much. So that's why we aimed for naturalism, just to kind of almost divert the audience to, probably the same experience those two kids would have had. That's kind of was for us. They kind of led. We were led by that basically to follow that. And so in a way, we also that way it creates a bigger arch to the end because you go from naturalism to something completely the opposite. So that was also kind of, in a way, deceiving the audience a bit away from that, so they didn't expect what was coming.
Yeah, and on top of that, the idea of like they were part of this person's house all the whole time, and that it's not something that you should worry about. Oh, it's just part of their furniture, basically. And it's just, yeah, it's just wow. Like once you have that reveal and you see how many videotapes there are, and it's just like, oh my gosh, like what has gone on the whole time?
Yeah, and as you said, we all can remember, or most of us who certain age can remember those days when everybody had videotapes. So then you just kind of rewind. It's like, oh my God, there's this possibility. So, it just gets under your skin a lot more that way.
Yeah, and I think there's a nice little neat trick later on as well where they have that little tab that you could break off on the
Yes.
VHS tape not to record over it. And that was like a really nice little subtle hint and throwback to of like, oh, that's just something they didn't want recorded over. And you just think like even that sort of little bit of idea sprinkled in is like just wow. Like it does get to me. Then it's like I remember breaking off that tab so no one would record over my Wallace and Gromit tape. But what was quite interesting about the episode as well is that it does jump between time periods, whilst it is set in, which is to say, the present day, and then jumping back to the sort of 90s as well, which it feels weird seeing something from that time when I was growing up because it's like it doesn't feel like it's a long time ago. But once you actually start saying to people that it's over 20 years ago or so, even yeah, so 97, so that's probably about, if my maths is correct, about 24 years ago, 22 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's go with that. And yeah, it kind of blows my mind seeing footage from that sort of era.
Hmm.
I'm sure that the story obviously is written in the script that they have that sort of time period. But in terms of as a DOP, like what was it like jumping between those time periods and using different aspect ratios? But then how do you go about shooting something like that to match the tone of the episode?
Yes, I mean, for me, that was actually, I really enjoyed this process. It was a question, again, tonally, not to alienate the audience too much, to take them out of the story with different aspect ratios and how much we can get away with actually doing it. Because also we wanted to kind of subtly implement already that when the first time they tell the story about this E02 character, who was a farmer's son, basically, that when we see the flashbacks, that they're actually taken from I mean, a spoiler now, obviously, but I hope your listeners have seen it all. I suppose they have. That then we basically learn that he's later. This comes actually from the final documentary, which wins the BAFTA. So that we didn't want to give away, but it was kind of a balancing act, how to not give it away, but still stay true to that idea. And I filmed a lot on old cameras. So I filmed on a Ikigami 3-chip camera, which was kind of from 1990s or so, just to replicate this look. And I had, I think, 6 different formats in total: film VHS, high 8, all those kind of 90s, 80s formats, because I felt actually the look of it from them is quite, first of all, it's quite beautiful and it has a nostalgic feel to it, which was kind of tonally totally right. And it just gives also this texture about memory. It's basically about memory, but then how we perceive the memory, how it's treated in the media, this kind of cliche of reenactments and so on.
Do you think this is just something that's just popped into my mind? Because they edit clips in the show from sort of news and going by memory of media. Do you think, as like a DOP, when you were when you were doing the first reenactment, that so when the Davis character was telling the story in his as a, should we say, filmmaker director, and explaining it to Pia whilst Stuart's listening with intent, when you're shooting that sort of segment, does that reenactment change to what you might capture for them for their documentary, because it's being told through a sort of biased point of view, because his dad technically captured him and was shot on the scene? We'll say this all with air quotes, but in reality it's not true, so he has a very skewed sense of the story.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, there were different layers to it. So we had different cameras for everything. So we had a camera for the news footage, which was actually, I think we placed it about 1980s. Then we had a camera for nowadays, which was basically film school camera, which is like a kind of small chip camera where they filmed the film school documentary on. And yeah, we had high 8 cameras for the couple when they filmed themselves. So there were all these kind of different layers. And yes, so it's when he was talking about it, it was supposed to be kind of almost a memory, but the different formats were not supposed to stick out at that point. Later on, yes.
Okay, cool. Yeah, because I was just there's just something that popped into my mind, thinking that if you have one way of like the story being perceived and then another way, then that might have been captured in a certain way. But I think going back to what you were saying before as well, the various camera and formats that we're using, that must have been quite fun to, like, as a DOP, sort of going back and using that equipment. Because I know if you're a photographer, then you could still play around with those old cameras and formats, and it's become quite like a stylistic choice. Whilst I guess now in that sort of age where we need everything in like 4K, 8K, the highest resolution possible, it must be so sort of different stepping back and using something that's not of that grade of tech.
Yes, absolutely. And what's really fun about using older cameras as well, they have obviously their own aesthetic, and you kind of find a look which is, its own thing. It's not necessarily ugly, it's got its own feel to it. And that's really good, great to have a chance. It's very hard to find those cameras nowadays. We're lucky enough that we have somebody in the UK who can do it. But in the world, there are only like a handful of people who still supply those cameras, and they're workable basically. And it's a certain look you can probably get pretty close to in post, but it's never quite the same. I found I was got a bit disappointed when you try to recreate it in post via VFX. Much better to shoot it for real.
Yeah, I guess with the whole VFX element, it would be maybe lack of a better word, a bit too clean for what is being captured, right? In terms of just like, as a VFX artist, you can sort of just put over like a layer of a filter, or I'm obviously paraphrasing what they do. So, if any of VFX artists are listening, sorry for saying if it's just a filter that you put on. But in terms of just if you have it all captured, then you kind of have that whole length of what you have to look for and what you want to go for.
Yeah, it's also the immediate response when you film it. Obviously, you get the results straight away, so you can react to them rather than later down the pipeline when it's kind of too late for that. So that also informs then how you shoot it, really.
Yeah, and I think as well, having that play with aspect ratios as well, and the look of it kind of then plays a part in it later on when they're making their documentary, and how the sort of style that they want to go with as well.
Absolutely. I mean, that was also, about their characters coming from kind of slightly idealistic, coming from film school. And then we all, I think we all can relate to this, to kind of idealism, and then later becomes something else. And often practicalities of life change and so on. And in a way, the format also kind of underlines that, the different formats.
Yeah, and I guess having that sort of stylistic choice of people still being in film school and wanting to still finding their voice, should we say? So they go for a certain, like, how does this look cool, and how can we go use this? Use these sort of formats to really push forward what we want to say. I think as well, like, just to sort of deviate a little bit, but like, because as like the episode follows filmmakers and how they sort of go about wanting to make their film, in this case a documentary, so it's probably slightly different to a sort of narrative approach. But because it is about filmmakers, did you ever see yourself in any of the characters in the way that they sort of wanted to make their film and how they went about it?
I think, yeah, it's a kind of a universal theme in there, really, and not just for filmmaking, kind of for the creative process. When you're doing, when you go to university, you're full of idealism, and then you have certain ideas, and they're often not completely cooked, but the idealism is there, and then there's this kind of big gap between that and the real world, and to bridge that, and then how do you keep some of this idealism, but also how do you adapt? Because what the viewers want, or what's actually working. So definitely can see myself in that, and had similar experiences. If I don't think documentary is that different from drama in that way, actually. So yes, definitely reminded
Yeah.
of my own past.
When you're sort of slumming it out and being like, "Yep, we're going to capture this, we're going to do this, we're going to do that." I think it's interesting what you say as well. That the narrative and documentary, there's not too much difference in it. I guess now, like, there probably isn't. I think that bridge probably is even become even smaller now with how much is being made in terms of documentary styles and how the sort of format people are using it, and stories that they want to tell.
I mean,
Because
obviously there is a practical, totally big, huge practical difference. But in a way, the way of thinking about it and how to structure it, that's what I meant. It's kind of can be very close. And also that in drama, you have to deal with the reality of what's in front of you. You can't completely create what's up here. So you just have to kind of take what's actually in front of you and then adapt. And that's kind of the same process in documentary, I would think, to my experience.
oh, okay. Because have you had any experience with documentary filmmaking?
Yeah, I did. I started out shooting lots of music documentaries, and I felt like that was kind of my education, really, and it was great. I learned a lot from it. I think it was invaluable. And with that approach, I kind of went also into drama, and I found, just to look at your what's there and just be open for that as well. As just don't miss anything what's going on, to then miss really important moments, because the script is one thing, and then how to realize the script is another thing, I think. And that's kind of my job, obviously.
You can read it one way on a page, right? The script, but if somebody's reacting to it differently, or as an actor, sometimes they might just go off key a little bit and improvise slightly how they're going to behave or where they're going to be. I think I was watching a behind the scenes on the BAFTA website for this episode, which is quite ironic, really. But and there's a number of scenes that they use where a lot of it was quite handheld, which sort of adds to the drama of it, but also makes it a bit, as you said, sort of more realistic. And having that music video sort of documentary background, did that help you in terms of how the camera would move if it's handheld?
Yes, I think that definitely helps, because I got trained in that, and you have to kind of think on your feet and very quickly how to edit a scene as a cameraman as well on documentaries to get all the shots, because you only have one take. You can't retake things in documentaries, which is a really good learning curve, basically learning ground to just get that, be really fast on your feet. So I think, no, it's more, to be honest, it's more a stylistic question. It was very much led by Sam, who was pushing that naturalism, which I think was absolutely the right decision. We discussed it a lot. I wasn't quite sure, should we not be more stylistic, stylized, because that's how I always remember Black Mirror, very stylized. But actually, it was really interesting to kind of go a bit against the grain, what I expected.
So, for those that don't know, Sam Miller is a very prominent UK director. I think if there is a very good UK show, then he definitely has been working on it. I think some of the credits include, like, I May Destroy You, done quite a bit of work on Luther as well. In terms of, like, when he wants the sort of style that he wants to go for and gets like the style that he wants be captured, what are the sort of conversations that you would have with one another? And then what examples would he bring to the table, or examples that you would bring to the table?
We didn't reference that much actually, other films, but we talked a lot about tone and where to push it in which direction. It was always a conversation, so kind of a learning ground for me to understand where he's coming from, how he's seeing the show. So it just, it was kind of, I think we were pretty much in agreement, or it's not, it was never kind of a feeling, oh, this is wrong what we're doing now from my point, or I think he was very certain of what he wanted. And it took me a while to kind of understand it, but then it was great. And I ran with it. It was great.
There's one sort of scene that I'm curious to know about how it was captured, because there's a scene when they break into the farm after it's been boarded up to sort of investigate the kill room, should we say. And that is a scene that is predominantly lit by black light, which would bring up the blood stains and other images from the crime. As a DOP, like, how difficult is it to use a black light in capturing images, or was it a case that you used a certain light and then put a filter on top of it?
Do you know what? It was actually really, really easy.
Oh.
Nowadays, our life has become a lot more easier with these new digital cameras, which are very sensitive. So it does actually capture the black light for real. So these were practical torches we used, and we tested it obviously beforehand. And we had these new digital cameras are so sensitive that they can shoot in very low light levels. So that was it. And also it was kind of the approach to be true, to travel with the characters, use as many practicals as possible, so that we can basically shoot 360 degrees and be kind of free, so they can do what they want. And I just ran with it kind of to capture it.
Oh, okay. I was expecting there to be sort of like, oh, there was so much testing going on and elaborate planning just for this one scene, because I thought black light would be very different to capture on
I mean,
screen and quite difficult.
yeah, it is. I mean, also I had backup. I had like some 1 or 2K kind of black light sources, but I didn't never use them. I just didn't need to. So I was a bit worried about this, and I tested it before. It was kind of fine, but I was still having a kind of safety light in the background. But I just wanted to be 360, so that the actors can just run the whole scene through. And in the olden days, even a couple of years ago, 10 years ago, I don't think would have been possible like that.
Oh, that's quite interesting to hear. And in terms of like the old days, is that just because of the type of camera that would be not being able to pick it up, or is it a case of just lighting as well?
I think it's probably a bit of both. It's mainly the camera, but then also these new black light torches were quite powerful, and they had enough illumination to basically be strong enough to be read, because black light is very weak in terms of illumination. Mainly the camera, I would say, though.
Okay. Well, I guess you learn something new every day. So I'm quite glad that that it was quite easy. But then also, yeah, I was expecting something completely different with that sort of idea. But I'd still think that's kind of like it feels like some at a certain point in the show, like slightly icing on the cake in terms of like using something like a black light as an image, and then sort of, I guess, as an audience member, seeing the sort of sheer sheer sort of horror of like these crimes, compared to when you're as a audience member hearing them and then being told that it's like this, it's like that, it's like this. But then when you see it on screen, you're like, whoa, like, excuse my language, it's like, holy shit, this was a proper, like, this is a proper bloodbath in here.
Yes, and really, it was experienced through the actors in a way, so that's kind of they feel that, and we feel that, like, oh my God, being in their skin. That was kind of, I think, our thread through it.
Yeah, and as like an audience member, seeing them react like that, that adds to your reaction as well, because I think they've heard all these sort of, I wouldn't say ghost stories, but you've been told these tales. Maybe they're slightly exaggerated or whatnot, but then you sort of step into it and you think, oh wow, like this is even worse than what people were saying. Also, I'm quite curious about this question as well, is that like the episode is shot on some really beautiful locations. I know that there's a sort of bit in the episode where they're describing about, oh, how do we go about making this documentary? It's like, well, you need to show the beautiful landscape and the nature, and then cut to and then hidden in the underbelly of this place was, a killer in the mix.
Mm.
When it comes to being on location, and both with scenes taking place during day and night, how do you go about not damaging the surrounding area or the beauty with lights and flags or the extra equipment that you might need?
I think on this one, it wasn't that we didn't really just do much damage, I would think, because where we parked there was like a night scene where we had two cherry pickers up, and they were parked on a piece of stretch of kind of a road, so that didn't damage anything. When we filmed, there was a kind of a waterfall scene where we filmed in the waterfall. There was a whole infrastructure put in place, so we didn't damage. I think afterwards, 2 weeks later, you wouldn't have known that anybody was there. That's partly because the location manager, the Scottish location manager we had, that was quite important to him. So I think that was not so bad. I think for me personally, there's always a bigger question about making films and their carbon footprint, which is a bigger picture, which I think the film industry has not really caught onto enough. It's a lot of words, but the results haven't been really materialized, and especially it's a Netflix production. So Netflix still has huge ambitions, but they haven't been really communicated to the crew either, or they have not been implemented enough. So film industry is a bit behind on the other industries in that department.
Out of curiosity, how do you implement that sort of things onto your crew and into your projects to make sure that there is that the sustainability factor is taken into consideration?
In my position, I can't really do that much. I can just raise a point with my kind of the producers and so on. I think that the big kind of takeaways is that over 50% of our emissions on a production are from transport, of all kinds of transport. So that's where productions could do more to cut that basically down in all kinds of ways. Obviously, it's not a one-trick pony, but a lot more could be done. And that's not on an individual crew basis, because we have constraints of, we have to be at a certain time somewhere, and there's certain practicalities. So that really has to be helped right from the top by production. For example, it's quite hard to drive an electric car in this business because there are not enough charging points available, or those kind of practical things. A lot more has to be done. Otherwise, we just can't continue like that.
Yeah, I think with the electrical car point, you don't want to drive your electric car to work and then plug in from a diesel generator or on set or at unit base.
Yes, I'm
as
sure.
it just becomes,
I think, yeah.
not naming names, but yeah, you see it sometimes and you just think, wow, that's just like the total opposite of what the whole point of that is. That is something that needs to be taken into consideration. What I'm curious about as well is what was your favorite scene to shoot?
I really love a challenge, and I was definitely where the the river was. There was also a big waterfall which you can't quite see. We were quite allowed to shoot there. That was really amazing, but also challenging. It was full of mozzies. You could basically, when you took a deep breath, your mouth was full of mosquitoes. It was crazy. But it was just an extremely beautiful location, and to get the light in the right place and make it work under the constraints, it was kind of, yeah, great, get my teeth in there.
Is that the scene that was shot at night, or was that the sort of the day scene when they're playing around with the drone?
No, that was at night when Pierre basically ran through the river and then he fell and died.
I think that whole scene, the sort of capturing of that scene, is incredible because as the penny drops for each character, for Pia and then Janet, the mum, it's just that slow build up, and then the reliance of us and our phones to get in contact with people, and just seeing the lights of the car approaching. God, gives me chills just thinking about it, because you just think, oh my gosh, are people going to get away? And then where Pia's walking through the water and that river area, which is again quite beautiful, and the sound design as well of just you can hear the running of the water, which sort of adds to it to the what. Well, of course, it's going to add to it, but the sound design, having that idea of the still of the night, and then not knowing what's going to happen, and then unfortunately Pia does pass away, which as an audience member is quite annoying, and because not annoying, I wouldn't say annoying, but I think feels very unjust because of what she's just discovered and how this is the whole documentary was her idea, and how it's in a way, and as an audience member, you want her to stay alive so that she can reveal what she's discovered, and then for her to go out like that, it's like, oh man.
Yes, and then in a way, I think it gets even more twisted because then we're really with Janet, and I don't know how you felt about it, but I almost felt sorry for Janet when she hung herself because you can see she does this as a kind of for her son, so she's a really good mom, to get basically it's her doing that he gets a BAFTA really, so it's an enormous sacrifice she's doing. But on the other side, on the other hand, she's this monster, so it's just like, oh my God, just suddenly we are with her and getting under her skin.
I think I think that comes down to the performance and the writing of the scene. As you know, it is not a scene that it's like I think it's a scene that has probably no dialogue from the top of my head,
Yeah.
and it's just solely that performance of Janet, and the actor doing it, because you just think, as you said, like she's a monster. Like she was, who knows how many people they must have kidnapped and tortured for their own little games. But the moment that she's sort of doing what she's doing is for her son. So then it's like, oh, like as an audience member, you're right in wanting to feel sorry, but then also you're just like, my emotions and feelings are all over the place. Like, what do I do? What do I do? Do I feel like a monster for feeling sorry for them? And because she's thinking about it as a mother's point of view, rather than a rather than like a monster's point of view.
Mm. Yeah, I mean that's so amazing about Charlie Brooker. I think he can get really under your skin and kind of makes you question your perceptions. And that's what good filmmaking is when you can achieve that. That's for me what it's really about.
I still think it's like as a creator like Charlie Brooker, and the amount that he has written, and the fact that I think I don't want to say this too confidently, but I think he pretty much wrote the the entire season, of season 6, and he is very much the sort of predominant person in it, well, as a creator, should I say. But it's the ideas that he's able to come up with that's always quite mind blowing, in terms of just like, wow, like somebody just sat down, and I was and it feels like that he does it. There's like basically writing 5 little movies for the screen, and just being like, wow, like I can't believe that somebody's not able just to write one really good episode, but a whole season of good episodes.
Yeah, he's quite amazing. Absolutely. Not
Um,
many like him.
no, and it's just like, wow, like even to have like even to sort of somehow bottle up that creativity and like be able to like drink it and then have those creative powers would be quite fun and
Mm.
interesting at the same time. Just to sort of lead up to a penultimate question, what was your favorite scene that you didn't shoot in the season?
Do you mean favorite episode of the other ones or
What I would say, let's make it easy and say favorite episode, because I think we could probably spend the rest of the afternoon talking about different scenes and various scenes and being like what's good and what's not good, or what we really enjoyed. I think we could I don't yeah, I think let's go with your favorite episode.
Do you know what? I just because I'm working on a production at the moment, super busy, and it's only been on for a week, I think. So I only have seen one episode, and I really liked it. This is John is awful. I thought it was brilliant.
Yeah, I think that is a really good episode. I think that's one of those sort of twists and turns of what's going on. You don't know what's going on, and then having that sort of dread as an audience member, not not dread, but I think you have as an audience member watching someone sort of vicariously through, like watching it through another sort of way, which as your audience member, you're kind of like, you're just glued to the screen. But then also, I'm really surprised Netflix allowed that sort of storyline to come through and base it on that. But it's still an episode that's very much really like character driven, but then also at the same time, you're glued to the screen about like how the character is going to act and what's going to happen next.
Absolutely. I mean, there's so much irony as well and clever ideas, but they're not too over, you still want to watch it and see what's going on. So sometimes clever ideas can be too clever and they kind of distance you from actually getting into the story. But Charlie Brooker always manages, I found, that you really get involved and you actually want to finish it. You don't get bored at all. I think that was, and it's always quite funny and quirky. I think that's what's quite amazing.
Yeah, 100%. And it's like it's a sort of like a quite, if you think about it, a very serious idea in terms of watching, that people have licensed themselves as AI, and also the fact that, let's be honest, who actually sits down and reads the T's and C's when they sign up to things? So having that element of that in there, where you have that mixed with the quirkiness and sort of humor, you kind of sort of forget about it and get drawn in more.
Mm-hmm. And you still care for the characters as well, so it's not a complete kind of mental exercises also emotionally you get involved, I think.
100%, I would agree. Just to wrap this episode up, how have you found the reaction to the show? For me, I know this is going to sound like recency biased, but I think for me, like, Loch Henry is probably one of the top 5 Black Mirror episodes made, but that's my opinion. So, but how have you found people's reaction to the episode?
Do you know, that's very kind to say. Love to hear, obviously, that. I don't know, to be honest. My wife really loved it. That's my first critique. And other people, I actually don't know. I'm just kind of a bit at the moment focused on my other project. So I've read, I think, one review, which was positive. That's about it. So I don't know how it got perceived. Sam said it was really well perceived. So I'm sure that's good reflection.
I think if director's saying that, then that means it's good, and that they're happy with people are perceiving the episode. I guess as well, it's like, as you said, your wife seeing that, and she's given it the thumbs up, which is great as well, because when you work on these shows, I think sometimes you always want your family members to watch it and then be engaged, engrossed, and carry on watching it. I think your family will always be your harshest critics. That always will be honest about ideas or things that you're making. So yeah, it's reviewed well in the Raedeker household. Did I pronounce use that? Perfect. Perfect. David, thank you again so much for coming on and talking to me about your episode of Loch Henry, the latest series of Black Mirror, which is streaming now on Netflix. Yeah, thank you again for your time.
Thank you very much.
You take care.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Yes, bye-bye.
Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast.